here for you. Ooh. And now here's your host, Erin Page.
All interviews presented on the Remedy Revolution podcast are designed to provide information and inspiration only. Guests of the podcast may present opinions and anecdotes which are solely their own. And as always, before beginning any treatment protocol, please consult with your preferred medical provider. Hey everyone, welcome to the Revolution. Today's guest is somebody who has been causing quite a stir. She has been involved in fantastic new documentary. If you have not seen it, run, don't walk to go see Spellers, the movie. I am very pleased to have Dawnmarie Gaivin with me here today. Hi, Dawnmarie. How are you?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about, the movie followed stories of these kiddos who were struggling as non-speakers and really having a difficult time, engaging in life in general because they were not able to effectively communicate with their caregivers. And so what was this whole process like? How did the evolution of, working and realizing that there is actually a motor skill function that is needed in order to get these kids able to communicate? How did that come about?
Well, for me, it really started as a personal journey, right? I'm the mom of two non-speaking autistics. And by non-speaking, that's kind of an umbrella term for meaning anyone with no speech at all, or even minimal speech or unreliable speech, like kids who can script a lot or repeat rote phrases, but not functionally communicate with their speech. So I have one son who's a non-speaker. His name's Evan. And then his brother is 16 months younger. He's a minimal speaker. He has about 50 words. And they're 18 and 20 now. But back in the day, I was turning over every stone I could to find a way for them to effectively communicate, right? I thought, well, there's two of them, if I can't, as soon as Trey was diagnosed, I was a little overwhelmed. Like, how am I ever going to be able to do everything for not just one, but now two boys with these complex needs? And I thought communication's got to be number one. Well, health had to be number one. Healing them and getting their bodies into a more functional, healthy place was number one. Number two was communication. So I noticed back when Evan was little, he could follow directions one day and then the next day he couldn't. So I started picking up on this motor planning thing before it was even really in the literature. I mean, it was in the literature, but not under autism, right? It was just out there under dyspraxia and apraxia and whatever. And I would ask my speech therapist, who was amazing, and we'd work with 3 days a week. I'd have extra speech sessions and I'd say, doesn't it just seem like he can't make the sounds? Like he can't move his lips and tongue and jaw in order to do the thing. And she's like, yeah, but we can't diagnose apraxia unless he is like making so many attempts at words, and he still wasn't doing that, right? So long story short, I intuitively knew to start coaching his body. I followed like all the things that were coming out. There was a group of moms. We called ourselves the Warrior Moms before Jenny McCarthy wrote her book. She took our title. We used to meet at the Barnes & Noble bookstore near our house and dissect whatever was new. It could be the most recent diet, homeopathy, ABA, whatever it was, Amy Yasko's protocol. We literally dissected the literature and then taught it to each other. And somebody brought up RPM, which is kind of the precursor to spelling to communicate and to Speller's method. And so once I researched it, I said, this makes sense to me. It makes sense to simplify the motor demand of communication, right? Trying to move your lips and your tongue and your jaw, which are really fine motor muscles, is really hard. But using your shoulder to actually point to letters on a stencil that gives sensory feedback kind of made sense to me intuitively. And I brought it up to my SLP and said, what do you think? And she's like, well, you know what they say about those methods, because the skeptics and the critics say that it's the practitioner who's influencing the child. And I said, yeah, but I'm going to do it. Like I'm going to be the one spelling with Evan. Why would I ever influence my own son? So that's pretty much how I got started, and then had the grace to meet Elizabeth Vossler, who founded Spelling to Communicate and took what was an educational technique. RPM was more an educational focus, brought it into the communication realm. And then since then have partnered with Dana Johnson, who's an OT and a developmental optometrist. And we've kind of like innovated a little bit more on the method to make it really accessible to kids, even with really complex motor needs and regulation challenges and overall body control issues. So not just the folks you see in the film, because in the Spellers movie, of course, everyone seems pretty regulated. They can sit at a desk, they can do the spelling. And that's not what a lot of sessions look like when people are starting.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the number one questions that I get as a homeopath is, can you help my child with speech? And sometimes the answer is yes. I have had homeopathic treatment assist with some of these kids with their speech, quite directly and dramatically. But obviously, there are so many parents out there that are really still struggling communicating with their own children. I have to ask though, what is that like, that first moment when you get to communicate with your child or a child, and understand what's been going on in their brain this whole time?
It never gets old. I will tell you that. Like, I'll have parents say to me, oh, you must get this all the time now that you've been doing this for 8 years. And I'm like, oh, it never gets old. Like, this is a human being who for the first time can say something that you didn't know that was on their mind, or that they've been dying to tell you for years and years and years. Like, it's the greatest job on earth. It's not easy, right? I love it, right? But it's not easy, but it's so worth it. And I say that to families too. It's not easy to get your children from day one to where they're fluently communicating on a board that has the full alphabet, right? And from there, they can answer any question like that you don't know the answers to. It's not easy, but it's totally worth it. And as long as you're being guided by a practitioner, you can get there. And then sooner than later, like, I love being surprised to this day. Like, even Evan's been spelling since 2015, fluent meaning open, could answer open-ended questions since 2016. And I love it. I love when he surprises me, because that's what I thought parenting was going to be like, right? I thought I was going to have these kids and they were going to tell me what they wanted to be when they grew up, and they were going to live these lives, and I was going to follow their journey. And it's different than what I expected, right? Like, he has more support needs than I expected, but it's still so incredibly awesome once you can like tap in and learn about them, like it's like opening a Christmas present every single day.
Yeah, I can only imagine as a parent, in that moment, because I've actually been referring a lot of my clients who ask me those questions to the Spellers method in general. And it's so amazing because some of these kids are, quite a bit older, teenagers, or, in their early 20s. And to understand what your child has been thinking this whole time, and to be able to really get to the heart of, sometimes as parents, we think we intuitively know what they want. And, I would imagine that sometimes that's totally different from what they're actually thinking.
Yes. I didn't know that Evan loved his little brother. I mean, it really, because his brother terrorized him. Whatever Evan would carry around in his hand, Trey needed for himself, like would just run up, charge him, take whatever Evan was holding. Like, and this went on for years, and they look exactly alike, but they have very different sensory profiles. So Evan literally wears headphones just to protect himself from Trey's spontaneous bursts of joy, but still it's startling to Evan's nervous system. And I thought, oh my gosh, I was sad to think this is his only sibling and they really are like oil and water. As soon as Evan could fluently communicate, he went on this whole diatribe about how hard his little brother works and what an amazing person he is. And I was shocked, because to the outward eye, I thought, your brother drives you crazy, right? And he's like, no. In fact, Trey advocated, I have a 3-bedroom house, and Trey wanted his brother to share a room with him. And I was like, Evan, do you want to share a room with Trey? You don't have to, you can have your own. He's like, no, I'll do it for him. I mean, it's really, really sweet. And as a mom, I'm like, well, that's a nice surprise. He also loves Tupac, which I didn't expect or know. And explicit lyrics and all. I'm like, well,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we can't have our cake and eat it too, right? Awesome. So talk to me a little bit about this process. For those who are unfamiliar, I did actually have a father and son, Dr. Kumar Ramlal and his son Amit, who uses a letterboard on the show several weeks ago. So some of the listeners were able to view that. That episode is available on YouTube for those of you who are interested in kind of seeing the visuals of what a letterboard looks like. So talk to me a little bit about what the process is. So when you have a child coming in, is it typically they're at, say, reading age, or do you start even below that? What is the typical process for you?
Before I forget to say, so our book, we wrote a manual, basically the Speller's Guidebook. So we actually have several pages in the beginning talking about what to expect before you even come for a first evaluation. So I want to reference that's on Amazon, called the Speller's Guidebook. We will assess. I will assess as young as 4 years old. So will Dana. Most of the children, in fact, almost all of them, once they become fluent, tell us that they were reading by like age 2.5 or 3. Now, some of them, it was hyperlexia, but a lot of them are like, I could just do it. Like they either taught themselves or they taught on a CNN ticker or like subtitles on things. Their brains are definitely wired differently in a cool, exciting way, right? I personally, this is just a personal opinion, also think that's what makes them so environmentally susceptible to things, is this different wiring has made them a little more vulnerable, if you will. But the way their minds work is so fascinating to me. And so 4 years old is young enough, like they can already identify letters, even if they're failing miserably at that in preschool, even if they're like, nope, they don't know their numbers, they don't know their letters. I guarantee you they do. What they do not know is how to motor plan and coordinate the looking with the poking, like to actually scan, hold their fixation vision, and then motor plan purposefully, intentionally, and move their finger to the card, to the flash card, or to the object or whatever. So we basically teach the motor skills. Now, 4-year-olds can be so young that they're still climbing the walls and need a lot of sensory work and OT and whatever. So a lot of them are still too young. But I get, as a parent, I'd want to have my child assessed and hear that firsthand, right? And say, what should I do between now and age 6 or 7 or whatever age you think is best to start lessons? But some parents are ready to give it a go. And if at 4 years old, you're not intimidated, you don't have 4 other children, like, you know, you literally can dedicate a lot of time and effort and energy, you can start that young. But I think 6 and 7 is a good age. They're a little more used to adult directed instruction because there's some degree of eventually coaching that child to sit in a chair long enough to spell a single word. My kids don't sit still. So, and they're 18 and 20. So don't think you have to have a kid who can totally sit, you know, hands folded. Listening doesn't have a look. They can be moving around the room while I'm reading the lesson. It's very floor time based, at least in Speller's method. We're very flexible with regulation. Whatever it takes to have your child be regulated and available for learning, that's what we want to do. And then when it's time to sit and spell and do the motor planning, we do all the verbal coaching to get their eyes and their hand coordinated to get to the letters. So in the very beginning, the alphabet is split across these 3 stencils so that the targets, each letter is like 2.5, 3 inches big, much easier to hit. They only have to visually discriminate between 8 or 9 letters at a time. And you're telling them the word you want them to spell, or you're asking them a question based on a short little passage you read that the answer was already in the passage. So we teach everything that we're going to ask back. It's not a quiz, right? These kids have been through enough assessments that they fail because every assessment, including IQ tests, require proficient motor skills to prove that you understand or know things. No one's ever taught them the motor skills. So we really teach them the motor skills on the board and also off the board in a more OT fashion with intentional motor exercises and things like that.
Yeah. So what are we talking as far as timeline? I know a lot of people are coming to you now that, you know, might have older children or teenagers even. So I would suspect that the timeline for an older child might be a little bit different than, say, a 4-year-old. But what are we talking about when it comes to getting from, you know, point A, where we're just trying to poke at the initial letters, until we get to, you know, perhaps typing or those kinds of, you know, things?
Everybody asks that question, and I get it. It's really hard to give a blanket statement because even the movie, JB Hanley asked me a few months after it came out, he said, DM, do you think I did a disservice because Jamie got fluent so quickly? Like, is that hard? People are comparing now what we call the acquisition phase to how quickly Jamie got fluent. And I said, no, I go, yeah, some people do ask that question and they start to think it's taking too long if it's 6 months and you're still on the 3 boards, for instance. I said, but please don't be so humble and tell people how many hours a day you guys were actually putting into this. Like Jamie was older. So sometimes being older is the biggest asset. He was older. He was healthy. He was more regulated. His ability to sit and practice the motor skill every day. He could sit with his dad for hours and his mom for hours and practice. So what he accomplished in 3 months takes most people 12 months, right? So the average, and we don't really like to say this because every profile is different. Like if you're asking me to compare a Jamie or my son, Evan, to someone with cerebral palsy who's in a wheelchair who comes into my office, and how long is it going to take for the child or the young adult in the wheelchair compared to a Jamie, like it's apples to oranges. But if you practice, and there's also the recipe of how often are you practicing? Because this is not a drop your kid off at the center kind of therapy. This is a homegrown. Parents or caregivers need to learn to be communication partners. Daily practice, and if not daily, at least 3 to 5 times a week is essential. So with all those caveats, if you have a more or less typical motor profile, so apraxic, non-speaking, minimal speaking, and you're practicing 3 to 5 times a week, almost guarantee they're on to the 26 stencil at least within a year. And on that 26 stencil, now you can start doing questions that have multiple choice answers, semi-opens, we call them, where for the first time, you don't know which answer your child's going to pick. You're still using lessons because when they're skill building, you want to have something to fall back on. So we have these pre-printed lessons, right? And the lesson could be on orienteering and reading a compass. And the question I ask on the 26 board is, hey, name one of the cardinal directions. And I don't know whether they're going to say north, south, east, or west. This is the beginning of getting to using the boards as communication. It's that space where I don't know what you're going to say, but I have some context. And then you give me an answer. And I'm able to follow you with my own executive attention, like follow you as you're spelling and communicating that thought. A month or two later, now you're able to ask questions, and I like to call them low risk. Don't start with the things you've been dying to ask them for 17 years. Like, who's your favorite parent? No, I'm just kidding. Whatever, like, where does it hurt? Tell me about your GI. Because by the way, my biggest motivation was to have Evan help me heal his gut, his GI issues, right? So I was like, I need data. I need subjective data from you. I'm a nurse, by the way, by trade before all this. So when I start using terminology, and I'm like, I need information from you rather than my mom intuition. And I really wanted him to communicate those things. But those aren't the first questions you can ask your child. You need to ask them something low risk, like it says in the book, Underestimated. I asked Jamie, if you were a professional shuffleboard player, what would your shuffleboard name be? Because you have to have a name, right? So let's just say the communication breaks down because he starts to get Miss Pokey. Like, I can't read it anymore. It's not cleanly the right, a word. It doesn't matter, right? I didn't ask him something super important. And so he spells out notoriously strong. And from there, once we break through that little moment, the open answers start coming, right? The little questions at the end of the lesson. And then once he's developed, like any speller has developed, I call it cognitive motor control. That's what we call it in our lesson, in our model, is that it's a bit of executive functioning, but a lot of motor planning, because motor planning starts actually in the brain with having an idea, making a plan, sequencing and organizing. Sorry, you guys, if you're listening to this, you can't see it, but whatever. With the software update on my computer, now when I make hand gestures, I get all these crazy effects.
We got fireworks here.
Jazz hands. Anyway, now you can get to all the juicy, fun stuff, and you get a glimpse of your child's personality. And then once they're feeling really robust, that like they can confidently motor plan an answer to a question, like, or just go rogue. Like, you ask them about the Statue of Liberty and they say, hey, by the way, I really didn't like dinner last night because whatever. Like, now you have arrived, right? But to slowly eating of the elephant one bite at a time, and through structured like continuums. Like you don't want to skip steps. You don't want to rush up to get to the keyboard, which a lot of people want to do. Because if you do that, what happens is that keyboard just becomes a requesting device. You limit the cognitive output they're able to do. The whole reason this has been so successful is that by lowering the motor demand, right? So we're not using fine motor fingers on keyboards yet. We're using gross motor of the shoulder, and we're on a stencil. By lowering the motor demand, we build up those cognitive pathways that allow them, the language has always been there. The ability to communicate that language has never gotten to the motor strip to innervate either the articulators or the shoulder. That's the muscle memory we're building. So that just takes time. So the timeline is dependent on a lot of factors, but even if it was like, I've said this to a couple of families with more complex kids, I'm like, if I guaranteed you, which I can't guarantee anything, right? But I said, if I said to you for sure, it might take 4 years, but within 4 years' time, if you practice 3 to 4 times a week, your adult child, your 35-year-old son will be able, even at least in single words, answer questions that you don't know the answer to. Would it be worth the 3 or 4 years time put into it? And so far, every family is like, yes. Because I'm like, I'm sure we can get almost every kid to a 26 letter board, but you need to take your child to a practitioner and get an assessment done and, et cetera, to make sure.
Right. So that being said, are there particular barriers? Obviously, we always presume competence as a practitioner. Myself, I always presume competence. However, realistically, I do think that there are some children who perhaps have had a brain injury that, won't make it possible to be able to do this. So are there any limitations to the method at all?
Well, so far, by the way, I have clients who have had parts of their frontal lobe removed because of seizure issues, other traumatic brain injuries, and they still are making the progress that I was describing, whether that's thanks to neuroplasticity or just, like the brain being able to make pathways through different directions around the brain to make it happen. So I am still seeing success regardless of those kinds of things in their initial intake description. Where it does get tricky would be limited use of their hands. Now I had a student who started, he was really locked up, like his hands he had cerebral palsy too, and his hands were locked under his arms, and still on a day where he's having a tricky motor day, he gets kind of tight, but we're able to work his hand out and he can do the initiation and all the pointing, but that took a long time to sort of train his body. But Rett syndrome, like folks who are using eye gaze technology right now, that's over our skill set. Not to say that we wouldn't figure out a way to combine our coaching with those diagnoses. The other group of people that it's just a question mark. There's sometimes I'm like, I'm not sure if your child is a speller. Like It boils down to, and those are the highly speechy kids who have a lot of communication and a lot of novel communication and can carry on not just rote memorized phrases, but like some degree of conversation with you. It's a little ambiguous. And sometimes you don't know until you've worked with them for a little while. And like I said, they surprise you. Like they're saying one thing with their voice, which is very automated, and yet they're spelling out a completely different answer on the letterboard. We see that a lot, but that's another one of those situations that requires like full buy-in by the family to say, we just want to see this through, because there's going to be lots of moments of like, is he a speller? Is he not a speller? You know what I mean? And I like to be very transparent with people on the front end. Like, I don't know. He or she is in that gray area. People used to say these methods are 100% successful. And anytime you hear that, you think snake oil. I'm like, what really is true is that our clientele were self-selecting before this, right? Before the for the book, the only people who looked for us were people who were non-speaking or minimally speaking. And this almost always has worked for people who are non-speaking and minimally speaking, but they don't all turn into independent typers. So that I will say, like, depending on the motor profile, but we can get you to a board where you have the full alphabet and can answer open-endedly, and then take it from there and see how much time you want to commit to it.
I'm curious about something. So a lot of children with autism that I've worked with are scripters. So for those of you listening who aren't familiar with that behavior, it's when a child might repeat, say something that they've heard from a movie, and it's something that they repeat very often. So with those children, do you find that that is an actual conscious thought, or is it something that is just coming out of the mouth and has nothing to do with what's going on inside the brain?
Have been a few folks in my practice who use scripts intentionally and purposefully. They pull from movies to comment on exactly what's happening around them. But most of the students I work with, it is not purposeful. So if you think about motor planning or moving muscles, right, there's reflexes. Like if I touched a hot stove, I would intuitively, like I would pull my hand off. I didn't have to think about it and make a decision, right? Because the signal to move my hand comes from my brainstem, right? And then an impulse is like, the example I give a lot because Evan said I can, is that Evan to this day struggles with, if we're in In-N-Out Burger, not taking a French fry off somebody else's tray. And we can spell and talk about it. He's like, Mom, I'm so embarrassed when it happens. But like, if I'm too close, if it's within arm's reach, like I cannot stop my arm from grabbing that French fry. So every time we go there, I'll say, do you want to go through the drive-through or do you want to go inside? Do you want to work on the motor today? Or do you want to just take the easy out? And he'll tell me what he wants to do. But an impulse, the signal to move those muscles comes from your brainstem again and your amygdala. And then they become automatic, right? Like if you do it over and over and over again, something becomes really well myelinated and it becomes automatic. That's another type of motor movement. And the other one is purposeful or intentional. So to speak intentionally requires thinking, directing, motor planning, right? It's what we work on in spelling. So a lot of the scripting students are talking away and scripting away, and yet I'm reading. I do not make them be quiet while I'm reading because they can hear you even while they're scripting, despite evidence to the contrary. They can hear you because then I put the board down and they're able to answer the questions of what I just read while they were talking the whole time I was reading, which reinforces to me that a lot of that speech is automatic, because if they really were thinking those thoughts consciously and deliberately trying to communicate them to you, it's hard to also do the purposeful motor act of listening, absorbing the information, thinking of the answer to the question and planning it. So the fact that they can just do the two things at the same time tells me more often that it's not purposeful. It kind of dies by neglect often with spelling. Like once kids who script a lot get access to this form of reliable communication where what they're communicating is what they mean to be saying, they're often able to inhibit that scripting a little bit more. Madison, who's in the film, is a great example of that. She used to script all the time, and now she still scripts, but not nearly as much. And she sticks to her letterboard or typing. She's on a keyboard a lot often, right? Because she's like, and her regulation has gotten so much better because there's no longer this ego dystonic, like this discord between, wow, what's coming out of my mouth is not at all close to what I'm really thinking. And then people think I'm a child or an infant because I'm scripting Barney or I'm scripting Sesame Street, when I'm 25 years old. But it's just this myelinated loop that's going on autopilot.
It almost feels like a tic in a way, very similar to, a motor tic or something like that, which is why I asked the question, because I found it always so interesting, whether or not they're scripting because they're trying to communicate something versus just scripting more out of some kind of habitual type behavior. Really interesting. Okay, talk to me about parental involvement, because obviously we don't get to these, great heights without parental involvement. I think that's true across the board when you have any child with complex needs, regardless of what treatment you are utilizing. It is imperative that the parent be significantly involved, or at least some kind of caregiver be very significantly involved. So what is it that you as a parent had to train yourself to do when teaching your own two children, and what do you instill in other parents, during the Speller's method?
That's a great question. Back some years ago, I published a video, which is now on our Speller's website under resources, and it's called The 5 Pitfalls of Being a New Spelling Parent. It's completely based on my experience because I literally talked about all the pitfalls I fell into as just a mom when I wasn't a practitioner. I was just doing this with Evan first. It is tricky sometimes for parents to put aside everything they think they know about their child and also to not feather their nest during the session. So what I often tell parents, this 100% is a parent-driven program. You need practitioner guidance without question, but you don't have to break the bank. Like you don't have to see me or another practitioner every week for 18 months in order to do this. I didn't. I saw somebody for a weekend and then 6 months later for a weekend and then 6 months later for a weekend. Like I had like 6, sessions or whatever, total 6 interactions. But I practiced with him in between, right? Because apraxia has to be treated daily. If your child were typical and had apraxia of speech in their IEP, they would get daily speech therapy at school. So we also have to treat it daily if we're trying to make these new motor pathways instead of the old automatic ones, right? But there's a tendency, if we've been trying to heal their bodies and we're trying to help them, cope with their sensory differences and just make their way through the world, that we get into a session where we're trying to do a lesson and practice on the letterboard, that we are like, oh my gosh, did they have enough to eat? Did they not sleep? Is this really a good time? And we start second guessing ourselves and we stay in like the mom or dad mode instead of just jumping into like the motor coach mode. And so I always tell parents, try just setting up a schedule. Like, hey, we're going to practice 15 minutes a day. Now, whether we actually poke letters on a letterboard or not at first, it doesn't matter, but I'm going to have a lesson or I'm going to have an age-appropriate chapter book that I'm going to start reading to you, and we're going to practice some spell words, and I'm going to ask you a couple questions. If the child's super dysregulated, because you want to pull out your homeopathy and your remedies and and you can, but I don't want people to like totally get back into that mode. I'm like, I want to work on all the ways you can now co-regulate with your child. And we teach you that, right? Like, how do you regulate yourself enough to like hold space for your child who's also learning something super new, right? And it's hard and it can be really uncomfortable. So the hardest cases are when kids are really give their parents a hard time. It looks like they're giving a hard time, right? Like they're resisting going into the room. They don't want to sit at the table. They verbally are scripting, no spelling. And we're telling them the outsides don't match the insides. Just because it doesn't. Like oftentimes they're saying one thing, and then when they get to spelling openly, they're like, please don't stop. I know I'm saying no, but I really want to do this. Or they say, I want to go home. I want to go home. And they're like, don't take me home. I don't really want to leave, right? They're verbal. It's confusing for parents. So there's a little bit of setting aside everything you think you know, trusting the practitioner who's mentoring you. And like I say, the bite-sized chunk of that elephant is like, just start setting up a routine. Hey, we're going to work together for 15 minutes. If you can't even get off the floor because you're having a meltdown, then I'm going to work on my ability to regulate, stay regulated, hold space with you, lay on the floor with you maybe, and read to you from this chapter book. And we'll spend our 15 minutes together. And at the end of 15 minutes, we can go out and do whatever we need to do to feather your nest and make you physically feel better, right? That's it. Usually it's just getting started. And then once people get over that initial hump of getting started, they fall in love with the process because you get to share stuff with your kids that you never thought. You started to think, oh, they're intellectually disabled or they don't even understand what I'm saying. And then you find out, no, they actually understand absolutely everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important too. I mentioned it before, but I think, the major takeaway for me anyway from the movie was, to always presume competence, which I had been doing in my practice just intuitively forever. But at the same time, I do think there is kind of this idea that, perhaps there's not an intellectual in there. And the very opposite has proven to be true, which I find it's so heartwarming too. Like all of their stories, it brings tears to my eyes when I see Jamie and JB Hanley. Jamie was featured pretty heavily in the movie Spellers, and JB has been an author and pretty big name in the autism world for quite a while. So let's kind of talk about, does it ever get to the point where a child overcomes the motor skill issues and then starts to have more vocalizations? Do you ever see that?
Yeah, anecdotally, I can tell you that almost all of them improve in purposeful speech or verbal approximations. etc. I often suggest to families like finding a prompt speech therapist, because they really do look at the motor planning part of vocalizations, of making those sounds and articulating syllables. That's the best approach for someone with dyspraxia or apraxia, is to work with somebody who knows how to do that. And so a lot of spellers will do it. The one thing I will say though, and I've said this to Evan before, I'm like, Evan, do you ever wish you weren't autistic? And he's like, no. He's like, but I do wish I could talk. Like, I like being neurodivergent, but I don't like being non-speaking. I'm like, okay, fair enough, right? He would do anything to talk. But I've reminded him, as I remind my students, that it borders on an ableist idea, right? That speech is the gold star or the gold standard of communication. Like,
Sure.
Communication is the gold star of communication, right? But as a parent, right, I want whatever's going to be easiest for him. Like speech feels to me, probably because I'm still recovering from ableism myself, that we're all given this, when your child's diagnosed, you're given this, I'm so sorry, like kind of verbiage, which makes you think, oh, this must be a bad thing, right? That my child has autism. And I'm not saying it's all rainbows and butterflies, right? But it's also, being neurodivergent can be amazing and is amazing. And there's lots of people who are very proud of their neurodivergent status or differences. But the disability part of it, where it's really hard to communicate or access relationships because you can't connect and people can't know you for who you are, like, that's my standard, right? I'm like, let's get you that. And then if you still want speech, like if you still want to go after that target, that's reasonable. It's just going to be a lot of work, because there's obviously something going on, and we don't know this yet from science, right? What is it in the brain? And JB says it in the movie. Like, what is it? Like, is it something that's going on in the brain, in the motor strip? If so, let's target the science there. If that helps people communicate more easily, not to quote unquote recover them from being autistic, but to help them communicate, right? Like,
Right.
Who doesn't want their child to be able to communicate with ease, right? So, but Evan's already there. So I'm like, bro, you don't have to even type if you don't want to, because he's not a typer. He's got other health issues that, in fact, his inflammation goes up and down all the time. And as a result, despite everything we do, and as a result, I'm like, his body can get really out of control and unruly at times. And I'm like, typing is very fine motor. You can already communicate. I've tried to discourage him. I'm like, you don't have to. It's not like, that's not the race up the mountain, you know? So, and I would encourage families the same way, to say it's not wrong to pursue it, but make sure it's your child's goal. Once they've achieved spelling, if they are openly communicating, make sure we don't dismiss that, because that was like a massive hurdle, right? And just kind of revel in the glory of having that new relationship with your child first before moving on.
Absolutely. I think one of the things, my goal when I speak to new parents is to say, my goal is to improve the quality of life of your child. That's it. I'm not going to cure Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, any of these things, but, those kinds of genetic issues, I'm not going to take away what your child, who your child is. I just want to improve their quality of life. Yep. So I think ultimately communication is such an important tool to be able to do that. So to facilitate the ability for these kids to communicate with both their caregivers as well as people around them, I think is such a huge gift. One of the things that really struck me was the way that, and I've seen, your posts on Facebook and some of the other parents, the way that the spellers from the movie actually connected with each other, which I loved. I found that just so awesome because they were finally able to communicate with their peers, and they created this really amazing bond, which I think is just, I don't know. I mean, I have no words. It just brings tears to my eyes, I think, every time. So can you talk to me a little bit about that? How did that come about? I know you guys are in all different parts of the country. Yeah. So how did that work?
Well, as I was getting to know Jamie, when I first started my business, my practice, Evan was not happy about it. He was like, why are you going to work and spelling with other kids when you should be here with me and with Trey? And I was like, well, buddy, because some of us have to work and buy groceries and things. I'm like, but I also love it. And he's like, don't get me wrong. And I'm paraphrasing, but like, don't get me wrong. I'm glad you're helping them, but I'm jealous, like, basically. And I said, well, when I can, I'll bring you in. If you want to do, we call them dyads when we bring two spellers together in one lesson. I'm like, when you can, when it works in your schedule for school too, why don't you just come to work with me? So he had done it a couple of times, and then Jamie was new. And I was like, I just got this intuitive feeling. I'm like, you guys would really like each other. Like, so, and then I knew they both enjoyed hip hop and rap music. So I had written that lesson on the East Coast, West Coast rivalry, hip hop rivalry, which we had done back in 2020. We recreated a little bit of it for the film. And I'm like, you can't recreate magic, because it was magic the day that they met and the day that like it was all going down. And Jamie would stare at Evan's spelling. He just had never seen anyone actually using this method. So here he was practicing all the time. And he's like, but where am I going with this? Where am I going with this? And then he watched Evan. It was so special that every time they'd come down, JB would be like, hey, can you come hang with us at our hotel pool? Can you, so I'd work all day, and then I'd pick up Evan and Trey, and we'd head over to the hotel, and when they'd swim together every night. And we're still doing that 3 years later. Because Jamie's working on independent typing, like his hands are flat on a laptop, typing two-handed. And so he's still skill building. Like he's been fluent for a long time, but we're still moving up that continuum, right? And so the boys connected, and then same with some of the other spellers are from here. Maddie's from here, where I live in San Diego. Cade comes to town regularly. Vince is coming when Jamie comes. They try to coordinate their visits here together so that they can always see each other and hang out. And then it is pretty rad. It's pretty awesome to see. I mean, who doesn't want their child to have friends, or a friend, just a friend, right? Let alone a whole posse of people. It is priceless.
Absolutely. I think that's, aside from people saying that they just wish they could communicate with their child, I think the secondary thing is, I wish my child had friends. And so to see those kinds of interactions has just been, so amazing to watch. So from the sidelines, of course.
Well, there's that Spellers Freedom Foundation hosts, it's $5 a week, a social hangout on Thursday evenings. Pacific time, it's 4:30, so 7:30 Eastern time, where spellers get together from all around the country on a Zoom. So if you're interested, your child doesn't have to be spelling yet. They can be totally non-speaking. They just want to come and watch. Like, it's very inspiring to see the connections. And there's a moderator, like there's the practitioner who moderates and reads out the chat, but spellers will spell with their communication partners at home, and then the messages go in the chat. It's really, really, it's awesome. We don't want voyeurs. We want like people who are spelling, like spellers and families. Right. So if you're just curious, don't come. But like if you've got a speller or a pre-speller and you want to come, then I definitely recommend it, along with our spellers Facebook group. It's called Spellers Community, where parents support other parents. Those are two places to, just check it out while you're gathering data on behalf of your kiddo.
Awesome. I think that's fantastic. I love that you guys are doing that too. Just there's no words for me to describe. And I know I've said that a million times. I sound like a broken record, but I just, it's so heartwarming for me to see all of this. So, okay. So we are at the point, Dawnmarie, where I ask every single one of our guests the same 8 questions. These questions are designed to give us a little bit more insight into who you are and what makes you tick and why you do what you do. So are you ready?
Sure.
All right. Number 1, if you could choose only one natural remedy for the rest of your life, what would that be?
Natural remedy, because my mind went to deep blue ointment, like the doTERRA rub for
nice.
Does that count? It's not nearly natural, but it does have essential oil in it.
Nice. No, I've used that before.
You can tell I have a few muscle aches these days.
Right? A little stress relief goes a long way, right?
Yes, yes.
All right. Tell us something most people don't know about you.
Oh gosh. Okay. So, well, when I was little, I had open heart surgery, and I was actually the poster child for the American Heart Association back in 1980. And I missed a ton of school because I was on TV and I was at all these fundraisers and all these benefits. So I was like this mini 8-year-old celebrity because of my open heart surgery success.
Wow, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. So you had experience doing film then.
Yes. Who knew where it would take me?
All right. Number three, if I were to compile a playlist of happy music, what song might you suggest be added?
Oh, okay. So Trey's new thing is Shazam. You know, the app where you go, you can hit the button and find out what
Yes.
thing. It's like an addiction. But so we have a whole playlist, and Trey loves happy music. I think we would add, because I'll do it with him in mind, Justin Timberlake's "Can't Stop this Feeling" or "Can't Stop the Feeling." It's from the Trolls movie.
Yeah, that's a great one. I'm super happy. Awesome. And number four, what's your favorite guilty pleasure?
Can I admit it? On a homeopathy people don't support me in this.
Ah.
Sugar-free Red Bull is I know the sugar-free part, especially. Sugar-free Red Bull or French fries. Those would be my guilty pleasures. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Yeah, you'd be surprised what people say, man. What's the most influential book you've ever read?
Ever would be probably The Power of Now. And one that I read often is called The Four Agreements. Can I pick two?
I almost put my bracelets on. I have little bracelets that have the four agreements, bangle bracelets that say the four agreements. Don Miguel Ruiz. I love that book.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah, very cool. What does the word revolution mean to you?
Well, we consider ourselves in a speller's revolution. So revolution to us means creating a whole new paradigm.
Awesome. Very succinct. What does the word remedy mean to you?
It makes me think of Jason Mraz. He used to be my number one favorite artist. He has a song called The Remedy. The remedy means healing on whatever level. You know, things don't happen to us on one plane, right? You know this, you're a homeopath, but like truly things happen physically, emotionally, spiritually, whatever. So a remedy to me addresses all those layers of things. And it could be a remedy, a homeopathic remedy. It could be a song. It could be a relationship. It could be a feeling, but lots of things are remedies, but they mean healing.
Yeah, absolutely. Fun fact, though, is that Jason Mraz has an avocado farm in Fallbrook, right in the San Diego area.
So, I moved here for him, actually.
Yeah. Did you meet him yet? I never did.
Actually, I really? Have. Yes. I've been to some private concerts where it was like only 30 people. It's pretty.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. I lived in San Diego for about 10 years and never met him, but
we'll arrange that next time you're here. I'll see if I know somebody.
All right. We'll do that. And lastly, if you could impart one piece of wisdom onto our listeners, what would that be?
I mean, given what I do, I want to make sure people know that non-speakers, whether autistic or Down syndrome, are not intellectually disabled. I think that's really important, despite whatever evidence you think you have and all the reports you've been given. Like, don't rule out the fact that they can learn and that they are capable of communicating more than what they're doing right now.
Absolutely. I think that's such an important point. You know, when I first started working with non-speakers, people would say to me, wow, you know, they really engage with you, even though I do all of my work over Zoom. And I'm like, well, it's because I talk to them like they're a human being. And I think a lot of people don't do that. And so I think ultimately that's really such an important point that I think so many just, you know, whether it's just a misunderstanding or, you know, lack of education, but I think it's hugely important. You know, we are all human beings, and regardless of our ability or inability to speak or walk or, you know, whatever it might be, I think it's so important that, you know, we treat each other with kindness and presume that, you know, even if, you know, you think somebody's so far gone with dementia, for example, you know, you still would speak to that person like a human being, because that's what we are. Awesome. Okay, Dawnmarie. So For anybody listening who wants to learn more about the Speller's Method, who wants to watch the movie, who is interested in the book, the Speller's Method book, then please reach out to Dawnmarie via spellers.com. You can find all of her amazing resources there. And I think that's it for this episode. Thank you so much, Dawnmarie. It's been such a pleasure connecting with you.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy holidays, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care, y'all.
With hope as a guiding